Okay, good. Second thing is share this screen. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the GES seminar series, presumably the second from the last of the this fall semester. The seminar host, Professor Andy Miller, will not be available today. He has a conflict with his other things. So I will be taking care of the lead for the presentations. My name is Ali Tokay. I am the affiliated associate professor with the GES. Today, our group, which is under the GESTAR consortium, which is between the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center and several universities and private sectors led by the UMBC. So we have 7 e-lightning presentations, and each presentations will take roughly 5 to 6 minutes. And please write your comments on the chat. We'll see how it goes. If we have time, we will try to have some discussions at the end. And thank you so much. And with this, I will mute myself and share the screen with the Dr. Remer's presentation. Let me do that.
Yeah, I'm Lorraine Remer. I am a research professor at GESTAR II, affiliated with GES. Very happy to report on some work that I did last summer, or I supported last summer, with Sarah Neves, who was a recent undergraduate, undergraduate last summer, and she stayed an extra summer and to work on this project with me. It's mostly based on her interest in what she wanted to do. And next slide, please. And what we did was that we looked at the 5 largest U.S. cities, plus also the 5 of the fastest growing small cities over in 3 specific years to get some temporal information, taking the cloud-free days during July, August. And we were using a surface temperature product produced by the USGS from Landsat observations. So this is not the temperature exactly that Landsat measured, but it's been corrected for the atmosphere. It's getting the surface temperature. Sarah had access to census tract data, demographic data. So we had the percent of Black, Indigenous people of color, which we call BIPOC, by census tract, and also the median income by census tract, which we divided into quartiles. And we'll look at this analysis at the top 25% and the bottom 25%. So the question is, who's suffering the most from living in a hot city? You know, are there temperature gradients in a city that some people are in cooler parts during the summer, and some are in hotter parts during the summer, and how does that break down by income and race? So that's what we were looking at. I'd like to do Chicago first, which is the slide before this. This is Chicago, Illinois. If you look in the upper left-hand corner at the dotted plot, up along the x-axis, that's percentage BIPOC. So the more to the right you go, the more minorities that live there, and to the left is the more white communities. If you go up and down, that's temperature. So the hottest parts of the city are at the top of the plot. The coolest parts of the city are the bottom of the plot. And if you're the red, means you're in the bottom quartile of median income. In the black, you're in the top quartile of median income. Chicago is an extremely segregated city. There's very few census tracts that are like half white, half BIPOC. The more minority you are, the more you're concentrated at almost 100% non-white in Chicago. But it doesn't really, and the income segregates in the same way, but the temperature doesn't. If you look at the right, we're seeing Chicago to the east in Chicago, it's like Michigan. the coolest areas, which is the center spatial plot, the coolest areas tend to be towards the lake. And as you go inland from the lake, it gets hotter and hotter and hotter. However, if you look at income and BIPOC by census tract, there's a good proportion of South Chicago right along the lake that is both high minority populations and low income. And so that's why it doesn't really matter the temperature that is not distributed. The temperature is pretty well distributed depending, no matter what income is or race. I think I have time to do one more. Next plot. This is Los Angeles. This is my hometown. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, Los Angeles is a less segregated city. The people of color mix more readily with whites. But there is a temperature difference. There is a cooler part of the city that is primarily high income and white. And if you look at that in the temperature plot in the middle on the right, that it's middle of the city, you can see that. Those are the Hollywood Hills. And that's where rich people live, like Beverly Hills people and Bel Air. And they tend to be white and high income. And they keep the cooler part of the city for themselves, leaving the hot San Fernando Valley, where I grew up, to the north, and South Central to the east and south. Those are where people of color live, and they have lower incomes. We did others. The three other cities are Houston, Phoenix, and I can't remember the fifth one, but I'm not going to show those. Anyway, if people are interested in this kind of work, this kind of demographics, using Landsat temperature for things, you can always talk to me, and I'd be happy to share you all our other stuff and also the fastest growing cities. Anyway, that's all, Ali. I'll sign off now.
Thank you so much, Lorraine, for the very nice, very interesting talk from you. And by the way, Dr. Remer will be teaching upcoming spring semester in the GES, right? Right, Lorraine? If you want,
yeah, the advanced remote sensing course. I'd be happy.
Yes, I just want to bring up that knowledge to share of the folks around here. And currently at this semester, Dr. Amita Mehta, which is the next speaker, she has been teaching currently for the weather and climate. Go ahead, Amita, take the lead. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali, and thanks everyone. This is Amita Mehta. I am part of NASA Applied Sciences, so I applied research, and I also do training for stakeholders, teaching how to use remote sensing data for water resources management, both quantity and quality. And I just want to briefly present today this assessing impact of extreme rain events on Chesapeake Bay water quality. Can we use remote sensing to do that? Next, please. If you look at the watersheds shown here in blue, out of 33 climate divisions, according to NOAA, 32 has increase in total annual precipitation starting from 1900 about to now 2017. So as we expect climate to be changing, we will see that more extreme events or more rainfall events might occur, and how this might affect bay water quality is what the focus of this project. Next, please. And so the overall objective is this is to support shellfish harvesting activities in Chesapeake Bay. Can we provide early warning using satellite data? Because in situ data are really not adequate and not sufficient in space or time. So we're trying to, this project is part of a bigger project trying to develop algorithm using machine learning and remote sensing to come up with this warning for shellfish harvesting. Next, please. So here I'm just presenting one case study with heavy rainfall that occurred in 2021 between 26th and 30th October. And in the area shown, on the right-hand side figure, there's St. George Creek, which is part of the bay, and St. Mary's and Potomac River confluence. There was a lot of contamination and there was no water advisory given. And so we tried to look at remote sensing data for this region, for this case study. What do we see? Next, please. So this is just to put in perspective, on the left-hand side, it shows land cover. You can see there is agricultural and forest region and pasture in light and bright green. There are urban areas also in yellow and also red. And on the right-hand side, you see terrain, so elevation and also flood that occurred during this period in red. This is from synthetic aperture radar and shuttle radar topography. And the left-hand side is from ECMWF land cover. So this is just to see that the narrow strip that you see in St. George's Creek is like this. And then there is also a sewage station pointed in here that overflows when there is extreme rain. So next, please. So this is just to show that there was heavy rain, almost 45 millimeters accumulated, which is 90%, exceed 90 percentile value for these days. And on the right-hand side, you can see time series that shows half-hourly rainfall from GPM, hourly runoff, and soil moisture from NLTAS, which is land surface assimilation system. And you can see the peaks in all three corresponding to this heavy rain in this region. Next, please. Stream flow shown here in St. Clements Creek and St. Mary River. They both also showed peak in discharge for between, say, 27th and 29th. So next, please. So we started looking at multiple satellites and sensors listed here: Landsat, Terra, Aquamodis. So Aquamodis basically, Sentinel-3 OLCI and Sentinel-2 MSI. These are the sensors with different resolution and revisit time. And I'm going to show Landsat example here, which is 30 meter in resolution. Next, please. So it is usually remote sensing reflectance is coming from water. The ratios are looked at in optical wavelength, and they indicate presence of suspended particulate matter in the water or phytoplankton bloom in water. So we are examining ratios from Landsat operational lens imager. So red, green, and blue wavelengths are used and the ratios are constructed. Next, please. This is just the true color image pre-flood or pre-rain. This is 20th October and this is 5th November. So in here, you can see, just looking at the image, you can see the difference visually. Next one, please. And when you look at the ratios, blue, green, and red, blue, first thing you notice is that green, blue, and red, blue have, and red, green have bigger signal in this region compared to red and blue. And if you look at, most of this is positive in green, blue, and red, green is combination of both, but St. George's Creek and St. Mary's area, this is mostly blue, green is mostly positive, red, green also is somewhat negative. So next, please. And if we've looked at in situ measurements available just at one location, and we have looked at this box here showing green and all the ratios, and the significant differences between pre and post rain event or flooding. You can see the differences are large in green and blue. This is mean and this is median and standard deviation. So green-blue ratio shows more significant, bigger number. Also, if you look at red and blue, you can see the difference in mean. Next one, please. So just to summarize this ongoing project, just based on Landsat sample images for heavy rain that we examined, there was increased runoff that we saw discharge in this area. And when you look at optical imagery for two images, which were cloud-free, 20th October and 5th November, you do see some differences. So what you see is that in St. George's Creek area, there is increase in blue-green reflectance ratio post-flood. That suggests both either increase in chlorophyll concentration and or decrease in colored dissolved organic matter. They both can be happening. And that's likely due to, of course, increased runoff. And in several areas, red-green reflectance ratio show post-flood increase. That's consistent with if there is sediment coming in and chlorophyll also is increasing. So of course this is just conjecture based on past studies and remote sensing data. Now we're looking at other sensors, other satellites, and also in situ data, which are really not very coincident with satellite images. So it's kind of hard to assess, but we're trying to come up with this signature so that they can be used in machine learning to predict or to show water quality impact when there is heavy rainfall. And we are now looking at a wider area of bay where there are other land cover can also come in play, like there is agricultural runoff, there is urban runoff, and there is wetland. So we're looking at classified by a different land cover from where runoff is coming to the bay and what optical signature we see in the satellite. Next, please. I think this is the last one. So.
I think this was the last one.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Now I need to move on to the next speaker. Let's see if I can. So the next speaker is actually Dr. Campbell. She's joining us from Central Europe. Thank you, Petya, for joining us from the Europe. So I think you are a PDF documentation, and I think pretty much the best we can do like this, and I think you can start talking. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. It's my pleasure to present a study that we did with my colleague Fred Huemmrich and our intern Sarah McKnight in support of the NASA Surface Biology and Geology mission, which is to be launched in 2006. Next. So toward Ali, next slide. Next slide. There are a set of goals for the missions to develop a large time series. And so during the summer of 2022, dense time series were developed using AVIRIS-NG data. So we collected the data in 3 sites. And the sites are here marked with A, B, and C, and they're in proximity from the coast. And so A was the closest to the coast, and so it was Quercus agrifolia, or live oak, in probably the best functional conditions. Then the next site, it's B, or a bit further from the coast at a higher elevation, also the same oak species. And the next site, C, is the same oak species, even further from the coast, with a lower moisture content. Next. Next. So we use the spectra to derive vegetation indices and study the changes. Ali, you moved 2 slides ahead. Can we go back? We use the spectra with vegetation indices and study their changes in time. And so you see the data acquired from early February until June. And so NDVI declined for the 3 sites. And so the first site that is closer to the coast is in blue. The second one a bit further is in green. And the one with lowest moisture content and furthest away from the coast is in red. And so it had, so they varied in NDVI, and you see the seasonal trends in NDVI. So we calculated the red edge index indicative of amount of chlorophyll, and so the sites are labeled the same way. And so you see the decline in chlorophyll parameter was the highest at the site that performed best early in the spring. Then we looked at the cellulose index, and as you can see, it increases for all the sites across the season and increases the least for the sites with highest moisture content. And then we use the NDWI, which is an indicator of water content in the canopy. And so we use these parameters to characterize approximately canopy property. Next. So then we used the radiative transfer model with the spectra and derived canopy chlorophyll, leaf area index, and canopy carotenoids for each of the sites. And so, as you can see, the seasonal trends for those sites vary, although this is the same species. And so the site with lowest chlorophyll content declined the most throughout the season, and they started at the same about amount of chlorophyll early in the season. This is figure A. In figure B, you can see that leaf area index did not vary much among the sites until later in the spring, like the time period of May and June. When you see with blue line, there was a rain event highlighted. And so after that, at the site at the middle elevation, LOI increased significantly. And then canopy carotenoids varied significantly between the sites closest to the coast and the site that was inland, but through the season, there was also variation. Next. Then we used the derived traits to simulate in a forward simulation to simulate canopy productivity or gross primary productivity, GPP, which you see in the figure 8. And so we found that there were no statistically significant differences among the sites, but with seasonality, there was a change and GPP declined for all of the sites. Though comparing the absorbed canopy to synthetically active radiation by the chlorophyll molecules, we see that there were significant differences with throughout the season in the driest site in red here. Next. So we compared laboratory measurements. So we collected a lot of samples, sent them to the lab where the measurements of canopy chlorophyll were done in situ, extracting pigments from the foliar samples and using also meters, chlorophyll meters. And so here you have measurements of the different species and among sites. And so in green is the site closest to the coast, and then in light blue is the second site, and in dark blue is the third site furthest away. So we used the lab measurements to calculate chlorophyll, to derive chlorophyll for many species that were measured, and Quercus agrifolia is the second group of species for all the sites. And then we compared measured versus predicted canopy chlorophyll using the scope model. And so what we found is that the measured was highest, and so the model underestimated at the high values of chlorophyll, though the data file pretty much close to each other. And so this provided some understanding and confirmation of the simulations. And so further, we will calibrate our estimates and redo the simulations. And so next.
I think we are all done, Petya, that your time is up on this presentation. Do you want to go conclusions? Or?
Well, I mean, you were not moving, but anyway, in summary, this was very useful in understanding further the function and productivity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Petya. Thank you so much joining from the Central Europe to us. And Dr. Campbell teaches remote sensing of environment, and she will be teaching on the spring of 2023. Speaking of this semester again, the next speaker is Dr. Huemmrich, and he is currently teaching Arctic geography in our department. So Fred, it's your turn.
Okay, thanks. I want to talk about something different than my Arctic work, and I want to talk about doing remote sensing from the International Space Station. We usually think of the space station, you think of astronauts floating around doing spacewalks, but it's also become a really important platform for advanced remote sensing instruments where we can explore the state of the art in remote sensing. Next slide, please. So the station is the advantage of the station as a place for instruments is that it's a platform that already exists. It's easy to reach because they have to resupply it regularly. It can provide power and communications for the instrument. So it's much simpler to put an instrument on the space station than it is to put it on a separate satellite in orbit. The downside of the space station is that its orbit is like unlike Landsat, where you get an overpass at the same time of the day, every time it does an overpass to a place, the time of day that the space station goes over a given location varies from time to time. And as you can see in the map here, which shows kind of like the pattern of the space station orbit, it doesn't observe it. The orbit is constrained to about 50 degrees north and south of the equator. So you can't get high latitudes or low latitudes, but it's still a place that's really useful for testing out these instruments. Next slide, please. And in fact, there are presently a whole suite of instruments that are now on the space station. They're really interesting. The first three listed here, DESIS, HISUI, and EMIT, are all hyperspectral spectrometers that measure hundreds of spectral bands as opposed to like Landsat, which only measures like 8 spectral bands. And other instruments include EcoStress, which is has multiple thermal bands and is useful for looking at evapotranspiration and surface temperature, the kind of results that Lorraine was showing earlier. OCO3 is an instrument that is designed to measure the atmospheric CO2, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. But for the kind of work that Dr. Campbell and I do, we're interested in being able to use it to measure fluorescence, which is the light that's emitted from plants when they photosynthesize. And it's a very, very little bit of light, but we can actually detect it with these instruments. And it tells us something about the processes that that plants are doing when they're photosynthesizing. And then finally, there's JEDI, which is a LiDAR, which gives us 3D descriptions of the plant canopy structure and as well as the height of the canopy. So we have all of these different measurements. Next slide, please. And what's particularly interesting about this is that all of those instruments went up for their own reason. They aren't there together. It's because the space station is there and kind of accumulates instruments over time. But what's really interesting about this is that we can combine these different types of measurements and produce new information that we really haven't been able to do before. That the spectrometers that are giving us hyperspectral data gives us detailed information on species descriptions and biochemistry. The GEDI gives us information on plant structure. EcoStress gives us information in terms of temperature and plant stress. And OCO3, through its fluorescence, gives us information on the photosynthetic processes that are actually going on. And so this is a really great time to take advantage of these instruments being on the space station. Next slide, please. In particular, what we're looking at is productivity of ecosystems with the hyperspectral data from the spectrometers. And I'm going to talk about a study that is done using the DESIS data, which is one of the spectrometers and is a commercial instrument on the space station, but NASA buys the data for us. And we compare those spectral reflectance measurements with measurements made on the ground from things called flux towers. And these flux towers are able to measure the CO2 flux into and out of ecosystems, which allows us to have this continuous measurement of plant productivity, of plant photosynthesis. But the problem is, it's only at the place where the flux tower is. So we want to be able to take the remote sensing data and spread beyond that. Next slide, please. Next slide after that one, please. And so we can take so this is like one fraction of a scene from an instrument on the space station. The triangle is where the flux tower is. We trained an algorithm using the spectral reflectance data from the spectrometer against the flux tower data, and then we're able to use that to map productivity over this entire region. And what you can see in this area is that the distribution of productivity. So this is 3 different times of year: spring, summer, fall, and you can see how the patterns, the spatial and temporal patterns of productivity are very complex, and really we wouldn't really be able to understand that if we just had the flux tower data alone, which is only really telling us about a small point in the middle of that image. So what this lets us do is describe the landscape and the complexity of the landscape in terms of productivity and how it changes and how it's dynamic. Next slide, please. So one of the projects that we're working on right now is we're working with we're working with people from Oregon State and the Smithsonian on a project called Quantifying Leaf to Landscape Predictions of Tropical Forest Drought through ISS observations. And these are some pictures of some field work we did, not in the tropics, but in Edgewater, Maryland, at the Smithsonian site there, where they have a flux tower, and and we were using this really cool drone system that you can see the picture on the left there. The drone has this long boom that comes out the bottom. At the bottom of that boom is a little robot claw. And what we can do is we can fly that to the top of the canopy, hover over it, lower it down, and have that robot claw grab a branch, clip the branch off of the tree, bring the branch back to us where we can make measurements of the reflectance of the leaves and the photosynthetic rates of the leaves on the ground, which is what the students are doing there in the middle picture. And so this work was done in Edgewater to prepare for work that they then did. I wasn't on this field campaign, but then did in Panama in October. So and then we're taking these data and then combining it with the measurements, the GEDI, the EcoStress, and the spectral data from the space station to model productivity of the ecosystem over time. Next slide. And so what I want to just end with is saying that the future of this kind of remote sensing work is really exciting. There are a whole bunch of NASA missions coming up. PACE, a mission that Lorraine's involved in as well, which is going to launch in 2024, which will provide spectral data and at like daily time steps, so that we'll be able to look at the dynamics of these systems. Petya mentioned SBG, which is another NASA mission. It's going to launch in about 6 years, and it's going to make higher spatial resolution spectral images that will allow us to look at more detail. There's another mission coming up, Glimmer, which is going to be in geostationary orbit. So it's going to hover over a single spot on the Earth and make observations within a day. So we'll be able to look at variability within a day, not just from day to day. But also with that, there is like a bunch of commercial satellites going up. Planet is launching a set of satellites with hyperspectral data called Tanager. There's a constellation from a company called Satellogic. There's another one called Orbital Sidecar. They're putting these kinds up. And then there are satellites from other nations like Chime, Prisma from the ESA. Prisma is actually up there now from the Italians. NMAP is a German satellite. So we're moving into this time of a whole new set of types of satellite measurements that get us beyond like the Landsat and into a new era of remote sensing. It's really exciting time. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred, for the very nice and interesting talk from you. And now we are gonna go to the ice, and Dr. Shuman is our next speaker, and I'm gonna run the movie for him. Here we go, Christopher Shuman. Please go ahead.
Thanks everybody for turning out during lunchtime, and I'll just take you through a short version of the long talk I gave last year about this time, in part because this was requested by the folks that put together a Nature paper. I just put the links in the chat window. They wanted to highlight the dramatic changes since the Zachariæ Isstrøm ice shelf started to break up in August of 2002. If you remember the longer talk last year, then this is just a zoomed in version on where the really dramatic changes are happening right at the current ice front, pretty close to the grounding line. We did this in part to make the content easily accessible. If you go to the SVS link, you can actually download 2 different versions of the movie files, or you can just use the link as you like for lectures. I gave the longer version of the talk in Fred's class earlier this semester, but you can see for yourself that the breakup of the floating ice into those big tabular bergs is pretty rapid and pretty dramatic. I showed this to some of the folks working at GESTAR, and they said, "Boy, that's a whole lot of ice cubes." And I said, "Well, you have to remember, those ice cubes are in many cases much larger than campus is. So there's a pretty dramatic scale to these, for Greenland, very large bergs. These would not be large bergs in Antarctica, but it is still a illustration of the kinds of structural fracturing and rapid ice front retreat that has a lot of people in the cryosphere very interested. So this is just an accessible way of showing that off and celebrating the 50th year of Landsat. And I'll stop there. Thanks, Ali.
Thank you so much, Christopher. Very nice, very interesting. All right, so the next speaker is going to be Dr. Turpie, who has been teaching currently in our department in GES. So Dr. Turpie's talk, here we go. Thank you. Go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you, Ali. So hi, I am Kevin Turpie, and I'm part of the research and applications team for the development of the Surface Biology and Geology Mission, or SBG, which has been mentioned a couple times. SBG is part of the new NASA Earth Systems Observatory, and it consists of 2 satellites, or will consist of 2 satellites, one with a V-square hyperspectral imager and one with a thermal imager, and both are expected to launch somewhere around 2028. The V-square imager orbit band swath are basically like Landsat. They're 185 kilometers wide, 30 meters resolution, 16-day revisit time. But it will have over 200 10-nanometer bands ranging from 400 to 2,500 nanometers. And thermal instrument will have like a 900 kilometer swath with 60-meter resolution and a 5-day revisit time. Slide 2, please. Sorry. Just go to the next slide. Just been paying attention. Okay, so ideally, there's a number of steps that need to be taken to prepare a mission for aquatic observations. In this talk, I'll talk about the first two on this slide because there's been considerable progress. And the others will be coming up. Slide 3, next slide. So the concept of operations for acquiring imagery assume that all inland water and some coastal water will be acquired at the native spatial resolutions of the instruments. Over the open ocean, the imager will likely acquire images at 1 kilometer resolution. The challenge is to create a mask that determines where we switch from native resolution to coastal resolution. These two maps we see here are composites of various mass regions of interest taken from the community and from literature, and then basically unioned and ArcInfo and put together. And these are notional for helping some of the initial planning and scoping of the mission. The TRR mask on the right here is more constrained because of the limited downlink bandwidth on that satellite, which is being developed by the Italian Space Agency. Next slide, please. So a more comprehensive compilation based on the Sentinel-2 mask and additional regions of interest are being developed with community feedback. And the project was undertaken by an intern of mine, America Avaris, at University of Texas, El Paso. And this priority heat map will help facilitate and inform trades as the project moves forward and has to consider data volume trade-offs. Next slide, please. So next we have to address the issue of speculative reflectance off the water surface, or sun glimpse, which can contaminate the signal from beneath the surface, which is important to get things like biology and different types of constituents, and the bottom, such as corals. The glint pattern we observe by eye from, say, space is basically a roundish region with a bright center, as we can see in the picture on the left from the ISS. And in the video, and you can see it moving around as the sun changes its position with respect to the observer here. From a scanning instrument in orbit, the spot moves with the instrument's scan line at a slightly different speed, and thus the glint pattern appears in the satellite swath as a long streak, seen in the image on the right. The plots are from a USGS study for Landsat next, and they show the percentage of pixels glinted out in some 3,000 Landsat 8 images for different ranges of solar zenith angle. That's what with each of these plots, and for different parts of the scan, ranging from plus or minus 8 degrees or 8.5 degrees. And you can see the impact is quite large. You've got losses up to 90%. Next slide, please. Now, if you can toggle back and forth between this slide and the next slide, so if we can fix the V-square image, we can fix the V-square instrument at a tilt a few degrees along the scan direction towards the west in the case of SPG, much of the glint pattern can be avoided, or at least the impact is reduced. The SPG V-square instrument will have a 3 to 5 degree tilt like this. Next slide. Okay. Of course, this does not eliminate all the glint. So the remainder will be mopped up using algorithms, as demonstrated here. The exact algorithm and its implementation is still TBD, and that's the next study. Next slide. So as the SPG mission enters the first development phase, with any hope this will be later this month, these steps here beyond the first two, and also, of course, we'll continue with the first two, will continue to be studied, and we'll start making more progress and looking at actual instruments, type of atmospheric correction over water, the aquatic dig products, which we're also going to try to sync up a little bit with PACE and Glimmer, as Fred had mentioned. And we'll need to work out in-flight calibration, including vicarious calibration and validation. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. All right, so I'm gonna let me close this presentation. Right. And I will be the last speaker. And I would like to point out a couple things before I start talking about my research. Number one, we do this event every year nowadays, and we do it in the beginning of December. We have a couple of purposes. I just wanted to remind the people that number one is we would like to expand our collaboration with the faculty and the students in the Geography and Environmental System Department and elsewhere in the university, as well as we would like to recruit interns or advise the students. So that's our second purpose. NASA is a good opportunity, as Dr. Remer presented. She had an intern from the UMBC. So hopefully that this will open up a new era for the students get interested. So as you know, the winter is coming, and my talk today is gonna be the precipitation observations that we collected last winter in New England, and during a NASA field campaign called IMPACTS. And IMPACTS, you can see on the screen what it stands for. We did this field campaign, a small section of it. Our joint purpose to help the IMPACTS field campaign to provide them the grant-based data, as well as to for the GPM mission, which is the Global Precipitation Measurement Mission, as a grant validation program. So my next slide is, when you talk about precipitation in general, just on the street, you have three basic questions that comes to your mind. Number one, will that be precipitation tomorrow? Second, is there gonna be rain? Is it gonna snow or ice? And the third, maybe the most difficult question you might gonna raise, how much we are gonna get? How much precipitation we are gonna get? Those are three basic questions that we would like to address. Now, within the NASA's GPM mission, as the Dr. Mehta mentioned, we have a product called iMerge. And iMerge can give you three-dimensional global picture of the precipitation map. This is a half an hour product, and it's very nice. But one thing comes to everybody's mind, what is the uncertainty? This is a satellite product. This is not the truth. And that's what we come in the picture as the validation. Okay. Now, this field campaign has been done particularly at the University of Connecticut, Huskies. And you can see here is the purple dot represents our grant validation site. And one thing that we do when you take a precipitation measurements, you compare your measurements with the operational networks. And these are the NOAA Surface Observation Networks, two of them. One of them they call co-op station, one of them they call ESO stations. In addition to those two, we have also USGS tipping bucket gauge in another sites. So these are the rain gauges or rain plus snow gauges that located, as you can see, from 3 kilometer to 12 kilometer range from our site. So what did we bring on the ground? What we did, we built a trailer. This is a new trailer for our group called Gale Trayer. And you can see that at the roof of the trailer, we have several instrumentations. We have what we call all-in-one weather station, which measures the traditional temperature, humidity, wind direction, speed, and pressure. We have a vertically pointing radar. It's like a weather radar you see every night on TV, but this one is vertically pointing, called MRR, micro rain radar. We have a main instrument that developed by our NASA colleagues called Precipitation Imaging Package, as you can see the picture on the bottom left. And that's a very nice instrumentation, and that's actually the only dedicated instrument can measure concentration, size, and fall velocity of snowflakes. There is nothing else like this PIP. And we just built about 10 of them. Commercially available, we have a Parseval disdrometer, which calls for particle size velocity, which is a great instrumentation for the purpose of the precipitation phase, some kind of a knowledge. And we have the pluvio weighing bucket gauges, is good for the measurement, the snow water equivalent of the snow. So last winter, what was the story? It was good. The weather nature worked on our favorite. We had 50 events. 36 of them were rain events. 8 of them were snow events. And 6 of them were rain-snow events. This is the one that gets more complicated for us. Really, is it raining or snowing? And I'm going to show you one example how complicated it can get. Now, before I jump that, I want to show you this classical comparison that what we did for our rain events in blue and the snow events in red about our instrumentation with the National Weather Service gauges. So that's something that we would like to cross-compare. And we use our weighing bucket gauge called pluvio as the reference for that. And what we find out, for instance, one of our disdrometer, which is the one, the Parseval we use, it seems to be overestimating. Again, they were side by side. That should be much better agreement than what you've been seeing in the bottom right graph like that. Other ones were pretty much okay because given the fact that they were not co-located, there will be some variability and of course there's some uncertainty. So the event that I wanted to bring really your attention of that, what you see here by the micro rain radar in the upper graph shows you the time series of the reflectivity, what radar measures. And the bottom is actually shows is the Doppler velocity, the fall speed of the particles. Let's pay attention to one the bottom. What do you see? What you see here at the beginning of event, it's all snow and sound like a sudden change in precipitation phase. We first interpret as the rain and then followed by the snow. So what we say to ourselves, oh, this looks like a rain and snow, rain, snow event. But my colleagues at Connecticut said, really? I was there physically, and this is not really rain, this is ice. So that's a good question. Is not, that means that again, the ice particles, you know, or wet snow, they can be as fast enough, act like a rain, so fall speed sometimes may not be the best. And if you look at the size distribution of the particles, so the x-axis again the time, and y-axis is the diameter, and the color scale is the concentration of particles. Yes, you do see the snow at the beginning, and there's a sharp drop-off when the so-called rain or ice phase discrimination, and they told me that colleagues, maybe it was a rain at the end, and eventually it turns back to the snow. And one thing that caught that we kind of believe them, if you look at the bottom diagram of this, when you plot the temperature and especially wet bulb temperature, you see them, they were cold. So although our algorithms at the top, which is red is the rain, it tells us is rain based on the fall speeds, the bottom says to me, is a big question mark, is it really raining that -4 degrees Celsius? Isn't that a bit cold for that? Again, what we have here, we have a strong inversion. That means the temperature increases with high above the ground. So it was raining in this, first is the ice coming back to rain and freezes again, depends on the depth of the layer near the surface. That's what you can see. All right, so last thing I'm gonna show today to you is what's the next. So next thing is we are just getting ready for another field campaign at the same location. This is the last year of this case. We are very excited. Rather than one site, we are going to have 2 sites, and we are going to have many more instrumentations that we are going to bring on the picture. So this is one graph of my second site and then the other site. That's all I am going to talk to you today. And anybody is interested about the precipitation measurements, please contact us. I will be happy to answer any questions and things like that. All right, I'm gonna stop here right now. So we all finished our presentations, and my next thing is the not sharing the screen. Thank you so much to everybody. Now, question is that, do we have any outstanding questions that you would like to have? We have about 5 minutes before the top of the hour. And let's get is anybody raised a hand that would like to ask questions to us? Any burning questions? Or should we go to the chat? But I would like to hear from you guys if anybody has any questions any burning questions or any of the 7 members of the GESTAR faculty.
I see some questions in the chat. Maybe we should address those first.
Okay.
And I have such a tiny little window here. Hold on.
Yeah, me too. I cannot.
I can go first if you want, Ali.
Go ahead.
Hey, I'm sorry I came in halfway through this. I somehow messed up my schedule today. I love these talks. The SPG, a lot of scoping work going on, but I feel like a bit like Charlie Brown in the football. Like, how likely, when something says it's going to happen in 5 years from now, how likely is the SPG really going to happen and not get delayed and delayed and delayed? Is it being built right now? Like, I think you hinted that, Kevin, and I just wanted to sort of confirm that so I don't get my hopes crushed again.
So there's some history there. So the original decadal survey for observing the Earth from space in 2007 actually defined a mission called HISPHERI for the hyperspectral infrared imager. And that was kicked off back then in 2007 and went up to about 2017, 2018, then when the next decadal survey came out. So for 10 years, we were chipping away at the concept. And I think the community was getting pretty jaded as we weren't really seeing this develop into anything. It was all pre-formulation using NASA speak. And then, but once the 2017 decadal survey for Earth observations from space came out, they basically made HISPHERI like a phoenix. It became SPG. Now, granted, we were told can't be just a carbon copy. We had to do new thinking. We could certainly leverage all that, decade of work. And now SPG, because we had an entire decade work behind us, I think are well ahead of the other decadal survey missions as part of the ESO. And we just went through our MCR last spring. We passed. We just did KDP-A. We are now waiting for KDP-A, which actually puts us into the first development phase. Once that happens, it is officially in the mission, and we get an official launch date. That is supposed to happen the 26th of this month. No promises.
Kevin, for those of us that aren't absolute NASA geeks,
yes,
can you define those acronyms?
Oh, KDP-A is Key Decision Point A, and phase. So there's like
MCR, Mission Concept Review.
Mission Concept Review. Yes.
Okay. No, many of us can guess.
Sorry, it just gets ingrained.
I know.
But basically, unlike HISPHERI, we've been moving in the past 3 years like gangbusters. We've gone from literally from the drawing board to a very solid concept. And we've set up partnerships with the Italian Space Agency for helping doing development. We're hoping to have collaborations with ESA, with CHIME and LCM for their, basically their imaging spectrometer and also their thermal imager, which will have 2. And then Kines and Trishna has another thermal imager. So we'll have like 4 thermal imagers in orbit all at the same time, which that would be amazing because probably it's almost as good as having, a geostationary. So things are moving, and it looks like we're in the chute for actually starting up this mission. So I imagine in the next, each phase for development is about a year. So phase A is about a year, phase B is about a year, phase C is about a year. Each one is a much bigger step, going from putting out requests for proposals to different type of instrument and bus and satellite spacecraft vendors and so forth, to reviewing them, to actually putting things together, finalizing requirements. Things will be moving at a blazing speed at this point. It does not mean, as you know, things happen all the way up to launch. Things can happen, but we are in a much, much better position than we've ever been.
Interestingly enough, there's a close parallel to Landsat Next in what Kevin's describing. A much more complicated plan than any of the previous Landsat platforms. There are 3 similar sensor systems orbiting with many more bands, supposedly by the end of the decade, quote unquote. I don't know how much these missions are actually in competition with each other. That's one of the curious aspects of NASA mission development. But one of the things that I'm working on is way down in the weeds, given that Landsat 8 acquires data with 12-bit resolution and Landsat 9 acquires data with 14-bit resolution. And they've asked us to say, is it worth it? And not easy to, quantitatively show the cost benefit ratio for that kind of question. So Kevin, whatever you're going through, know that others are going through a different version of it.
Trust me, SVG and Landsat Next are paying attention to each other because we're trying not to reinvent the wheel wherever possible.
There's only so much money to go around, as they say.
But pace is going up.
Yep.
It's going up.
January 23rd, 2024.
Yep. And Glimmer not far behind that. And we, in my slides, in the backup slides, we actually have something called the ACME, which is the Aquatic Cross Missions Exchange. So HAPES, Glimmer, and SVG come to the table, and we talk about things like CalVal, algorithm evaluations, common products, and so forth to try to synergize our efforts as much as possible. And Fred is actually leading something called the TICME, which is the Terrestrial Cross Missions Exchange, looking at Fred, I'll let you describe it.
Is Wile E. Coyote the
please stop Wile E. Coyote using this. That was my only.
Well,
somebody had to say it, Matt.
Yeah, we put rockets on everything.
All right, looks like a very nice conversation, and I hope everybody enjoy with these presentations. And you could see that how diverse we are, what we do in the research, but how also we have a common points in the Earth science. What we use at the end is, of course, the NASA satellite mission. So I appreciate all my colleagues who was giving talks today. I hope everybody enjoyed, and please come back to us and ask your questions. And as I said, one of our purpose is to recruit interns and advise the students. Yes, NASA has funding for internships. These are funded research over the summer or during the semester. As being the UMBC, this is not only for summertime internships. You can have fall and springtime internships as well. Please come in touch with us. Thank you so much. And I think I will stop recording here and see you next time.
Ali, before you do that,
yes,
that SVG also has internships available, so pass that around too.
Okay.
Happy holidays, folks.
Happy holidays. That's true. It's the time of the year.
Everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.